This is episode 214 of That Shakespeare Life. Just like William Shakespeare, our show is supported by listeners just like you who sign up to be our patrons. Patrons can unlock detailed show notes for each one of our episodes, which includes coordinating visual content we can't share on the audio, like woodcuts, portraits, samples of coins, and other artifacts from the period that we share with you on the podcast. You can see all of that in the detailed show notes when you sign up to be a patron for just $5 a month. Check out all of these benefits and sign up today at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife. In William Shakespeare's play, Merry Wives of Windsor, Bardolph declares, quote, "You Banbury Cheese," end quote. Now, he means this as an insult, but the reason the line is an insult is because for the life of William Shakespeare, Banbury, England was famous for making a particular kind of cheese that was thinner on the rind than other cheeses typical of the period. Therefore, calling someone a Banbury cheese was akin to calling them a string bean or saying that they were too thin. It works especially well as a joke for Shakespeare in the play because the character Bardolph is insulting is named, as you might expect, Slender. The joke is a highly contemporary reference by Shakespeare, and in order to better understand the history of Banbury, England, and their famous cheese, we have invited the chair of the Banbury Historical Society, Helen Forde, to visit with us today and explain what made Banbury cheese so unique for Shakespeare's lifetime. Helen Forde is a history graduate and archivist, now retired, having worked in local, private, and national archives during her career. At the latter, the National Archives, she was the head of what is now called Collections Care and wrote a book entitled Preservation Management. Helen has also written numerous articles on archives and local history. She has worked internationally for UNESCO and traveled to many countries, teaching local history to adults in both Nottingham and London universities, as well as postgraduate archive students. Since retiring, Helen has worked extensively with museums, notably the Postal Museum in London, and she is now a trustee at the local Banbury Museum and Gallery. Helen is the chair of the Banbury Historical Society and editor of its annual journal, Cake and Cockhorse. Hello, Helen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
How is the width of a cheese rind determined during the production process? Was the Banbury cheese intentionally thin, or was there some kind of mistake when it was being made that turned it into this thin cheese we know it as?
Well, it's hard to say. The 15th century recipe for Banbury cheese starts, take a thin cheese vat, which means a mold, and hot milk as it comes from the cow. And that's the only clue we have about making this particular cheese in a thin form, but it was acknowledged by several writers as well as Shakespeare. The rind is nothing more than a part of the cheese which has had more exposure to air than the interior. And some people pare it away before eating the softer interior, but it can be quite tasty. It's a different matter, of course, when the cheese has a covering, sometimes a loosely woven cloth, i.e. cheesecloth, was used in England for some cheeses like cheddar and that sort of thing, other hard cheeses. And of course, the Dutch cover their cheese, their Edam and Gouda cheeses in wax. At the end of the 16th century, Barnaby Gooch recorded his preference for Banbury cheese over that from Suffolk, Essex and Kent, but also quoted a contemporary proverb saying, "I never saw a Banbury cheese thick enough, but I have seen Essex cheese quick enough."
In her article for the Banbury Historical Society about Banbury cheese, Helen writes that, quote, "In 1531, William Tresham of Banbury wrote to Cromwell, thanking him for his good treatment of his brother-in-law, who was sending him a small gift, which included half a dozen Banbury cheeses," end quote. Helen, what made Banbury cheese special enough that it was given as a gift in this way?
I wish I knew. We've tantalizingly few references to Banbury cheese, and at least one 16th century writer, Thomas Horton, clearly didn't think that Banbury cheese was up to much, although he also sent them to friends. He wrote, "I send 2 couple of our country cheese, being one of the best pleasures that our barren soil will yield to us, to bestow of our friends. These Banbury cheeses show what a thin and hard hungry country I dwell in. The cheese may well be resembled to our riches, as the paring of the cheese being cut away on both sides, there is little left behind." Nevertheless, he sent them, and perhaps he was being politely diffident about the value of his gift. I really don't know. As we don't have a Banbury cheese, we can't do anything other than conjecture.
Helen identifies the cost of Banbury cheese in her article when she relays that one man tried to use Banbury cheese to secure a bribe, writing, quote, 2 years later, so this would be in 1533, Nicholas Glossop, who wrote, quote, I send you 12 Banbury cheeses, half hard, half soft, and wish that they were worth 20,000 pounds. Helen, 20,000 pounds is a substantial amount of money in today's currency, but allowing for inflation and tracking backwards, those cheeses are being referenced at close to $18 million. And that's just astounding to me. What on earth made the cheeses this kind of valuable? Is this a joke, or is he actually saying the cheeses were worth this much?
No, I'm sure they weren't worth that amount. I think he merely meant that he wished that they were worth that amount, as it would have been an enormous and perhaps more successful bribe if they had been. But it's wishful thinking in the best of terms. The little information that we have on the value of cheese in the Banbury area comes from the inventories of goods of the houses of those who died. It's really the only information one has. In 1585, which is not that long after, Catherine Doyley had 80 cheeses worth £2 13 shillings and fourpence in her cheese chamber, which is be worth just under about $700 today. A few years later, John Green had 50 hard cheeses, 80 soft cheeses, and salt butter, appraised at a value of £2 4 shillings, which would be worth about something around $600, I guess. And 50 years later, 150 cheeses were appraised at £5, which would be approximately $645 for nearly double the number of cheeses. So the value was going down, apparently, but of course there's no way of knowing what the quality of the cheeses were. So it's really very difficult to make any comparisons, but it certainly doesn't go anywhere near the 20,000 pounds.
So we don't hold out much hope for how well his bribe turned out in that instance.
There's no information about that at all. But it's quite interesting because it's not the only person. He's not the only person who actually tried to bribe officials with cheese.
There are 16th century references in letters and various documents relating the flavor of Banbury cheese, with several people noting they prefer Banbury cheese to the cheeses made in other counties of England, including Suffolk and Essex. Helen, were there particular plants or grasses, or perhaps even a particular kind of cow that they were using in Banbury, but not in other places, that might have contributed to Banbury cheese having a singular flavor?
I'm not aware of any particular difference in the soil in the area, which of course is what would make a difference in the flavour, or of any different animals that graze in the Banbury, in the same area, in the Banbury, the area around Banbury. The geology is largely comprised of lower and upper lias, which is hard limestone, which is well suited to grassland and therefore for cattle, but it's not unusual. The area was also well supplied with springs and wells, so the grass grew abundantly and was particularly good for feeding the cows in the later summer, when it was not as rich as in the spring. The resulting milk in the late summer was rich in casein, which is phosphoprotein, which is a major component of cheese. The area was a prosperous farming region, with the town situated at the junction of important routes, which probably accounts for some of the fame which the cheese enjoyed. It was easy to get to.
If you liked our show today, please leave us a comment and a rating on your favorite podcast platform. This lets other listeners know what you thought about the show, and it helps them find where they can learn something new about Shakespeare. Our show notes for today's episode contain more information on the resources Helen mentions, including links to all of the details, like the journal that she suggested, Helen's article in particular, as well as the Banbury Historical Society, and more. If you're interested in exploring Banbury cheese, the show notes are a great place to start. Find all of these things at CassidyCash.com/episode 214. That's CassidyCash.com/EP214. If you enjoyed our episode today, please consider helping us make more shows just like this one by signing up to support our work here at That Shakespeare Life by being our patron. If you enjoy the history you learn about patrons get to go even further behind the scenes into the history we explore with detailed show notes. You get to unlock not just the show notes for today's episode, but for all of our detailed show notes site-wide at cassidycash.com. You can unlock visuals like woodcuts, portraits, museum artifacts, and all of the visual content that we just can't share here on the audio. We pack that into the detailed show notes and give it to you, our patrons, to say thank you for helping us explore the life of William Shakespeare with episodes just like this one. If that sounds exciting to you, then learn more and sign up today at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.